Sophia Miller was the picture of a glowing bride. Omar Al-Farouq, the proud husband who promised her forever. Rachel Moore, the loyal friend who sensed danger long before anyone else. And Daniel Price, the quiet coworker who saw the cracks behind her smile. Together, their lives became entangled in a story of love, lies, control, and violence. A shocking true crime that would shake a Texas community and expose the deadly cost of hidden prejudice. Sophia Miller had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, and on the surface, it looked like she had achieved exactly that. At 27, she walked down the aisle in a white lace gown, her smile glowing for the cameras. Friends and family whispered about how lucky she was to have found Omar Al-Farouq, a 32-year-old businessman from Jordan who seemed successful, confident, and devoted. Their wedding in Houston was lavish, filled with flowers, laughter, and photographs that painted a picture of perfection. Yet behind Sophia's practiced smile, there was a quiet tension that no one else could see. She carried a secret she had never dared to share with Omar, one that gnawed at her happiness. Sophia was biracial, her late father African-American and her mother white. Because of her light complexion, many people assumed she was simply white, and she had never corrected Omar's assumptions. She knew from his subtle remarks and strict cultural beliefs that his views on race were not kind. For Sophia, the wedding day was not only about love, but about holding her secret close, afraid of what would happen if it ever came to light. The honeymoon phase felt short-lived, but in those first weeks, she convinced herself that maybe love would be enough. Omar was charming in public, generous with his gestures, and attentive in ways that impressed her friends. Yet in private, Sophia noticed glimpses of control, moments where he questioned her choices or demanded explanations. She brushed them aside, telling herself that adjusting to marriage was always difficult. The photos from their wedding day stayed framed around their new home, reminders of a love that appeared flawless. To everyone else, Sophia's life looked enviable, but within her heart, a shadow lingered, a fear that her carefully constructed world could crumble if her truth was ever revealed. After the wedding, Sophia and Omar settled into a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Dallas, hoping to begin their new life together away from the busyness of Houston. Their home was a two-story brick house on a street lined with trimmed lawns and children playing in the evenings. To the neighbors, they appeared to be a picture-perfect couple. Omar was polite but kept to himself, often seen leaving for work in crisp suits, while Sophia offered friendly waves, though her smile sometimes seemed rehearsed. Inside the home, the atmosphere was different. Omar followed a strict routine, preferring silence and order, while Sophia tried to fill the house with warmth. She decorated with family photos, candles, and colorful accents, but Omar often dismissed her touches, calling them unnecessary. Despite her attempts, Sophia felt an uneasiness she couldn't ignore. She longed for normal conversations and the freedom to make small choices without scrutiny. It was during this time that Rachel Moore, her closest friend since college, began visiting often. Rachel quickly noticed Sophia's nervousness and how she seemed guarded, her laughter more fragile than before. She offered companionship, hoping to keep Sophia from becoming too isolated. Together they would drink coffee in the kitchen or walk around the neighborhood, but Omar's eyes always seemed to follow, either through questions later or his unexpected appearances while they chatted. From the outside, the couple blended into suburban life, but small cracks were already showing. Sophia was cautious about what she said in front of Omar, careful not to upset him, yet she leaned on Rachel for comfort. Rachel sensed something was wrong, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The quiet neighborhood might have seemed safe, but inside Sophia's home, fear was quietly growing, hidden behind closed doors and polite smiles. As the weeks turned into months, Omar's charm began to fade, replaced by a more controlling side that grew harder for Sophia to ignore. It started with subtle comments about her clothing, suggestions that her dresses were too revealing or her jeans too casual. Soon those suggestions turned into demands, and Sophia found herself carefully choosing her outfits to avoid his criticism. He disliked her spending time outside the house without him, questioning where she was going and who she was meeting. Sophia, once outgoing and independent, slowly began to shrink into the role he carved for her, fearful of sparking his disapproval. Rachel noticed the change almost immediately. When Sophia arrived for coffee one morning, Rachel's eyes landed on faint bruises along her friend's arm. Sophia quickly covered them with her sweater and brushed off the concern with a weak laugh, blaming her clumsiness. But Rachel wasn't convinced. The way Sophia avoided eye contact and the slight tremor in her voice told a different story. Rachel wanted to push harder, but Sophia resisted, afraid of admitting what was happening inside her marriage. At home, Omar's rules became suffocating. He checked her phone, read her messages, and criticized her for speaking too long with neighbors. What disturbed Sophia most was how quickly his temper could shift, soft one moment and icy the next. He never left visible marks in the beginning, but his grip on her arm during arguments or the harshness in his tone made his dominance clear. Sophia convinced herself that things would improve, that Omar was only adjusting to their new life. But deep down, she knew the situation was spiraling. The lively woman who once dreamed of a happy future was now cautious, calculating every move, while the walls of her home felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. One late evening, while Sophia was asleep, Omar sat alone in the living room, scrolling through old boxes she had left tucked away in the closet. Curiosity had gotten the better of him. He claimed he wanted to organize their belongings, but in truth, he was searching. When he opened a worn photo album, the secret Sophia had guarded so closely was laid bare before him. The pages revealed photographs of her late father, a proud African-American man, smiling with Sophia as a child. There were group photos of extended family gatherings, filled with faces that carried the same heritage. For Omar, the images shattered the foundation of his marriage in an instant. He felt deceived, humiliated, and enraged that Sophia had hidden something so important from him. When Sophia awoke the next morning, she sensed something was wrong. Omar's silence was heavier than his usual moods. He avoided eye contact, his jaw tight, his movements sharp. The album sat on the dining table, left open deliberately, as if to confront her without words. Sophia froze when she saw it. Her worst fear had come true. The truth she had buried had surfaced. In that moment, she realized how fragile her safety had become. Omar's demeanor changed after that discovery. The small traces of affection he once showed vanished completely. His words grew colder, his control harsher, and his suspicion constant. Every action Sophia took seemed to be under a magnifying glass, judged with contempt she had never seen before. The house, once tense, now felt suffocating, every corner echoing with unspoken anger. Sophia knew her secret had lit a fuse inside Omar, one she could not extinguish. What she didn't know was how far his fury would eventually go, or how dangerous her silence had become. After Omar uncovered Sophia's family background, his behavior shifted from strict to suffocating. What had once been subtle control turned into a relentless grip on every part of her life. He no longer allowed her to see Rachel, insisting that her friend was a bad influence and a distraction from their marriage. Phone calls were monitored, text messages checked, and even casual conversations with neighbors were questioned in detail. Sophia felt her world shrinking rapidly. Every connection she had to the outside cut away until only Omar remained. The isolation weighed heavily on her, but she forced herself to keep functioning. At work, she put on a brave face, though exhaustion and fear had begun to show in her eyes. It was there that Daniel Price, a kind coworker, noticed her change. Daniel had always admired Sophia's work ethic and warmth, but now he saw someone quieter, distracted, and worn down. He asked gentle questions, suggesting she might talk to someone about what was troubling her. Sophia would only smile faintly and dismiss his concern, never daring to admit what was happening at home. She was terrified that confiding in anyone would somehow make her situation worse. At night, the house became a place of fear rather than rest. Omar's anger surfaced in unexpected ways, slamming doors, criticizing her cooking, or accusing her of lying about trivial matters. Sophia learned to move carefully, to speak cautiously, and to read his moods before opening her mouth. Each day felt like walking on a tightrope above danger. She missed the freedom of her old life, the laughter she once shared with Rachel, and the simple peace of being herself. But with Omar watching her every step, escape felt impossible. Sophia's silence was no longer just about protecting a secret. It was about surviving. The breaking point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon when the neighborhood was unusually still. Children were inside, and most families were enjoying their weekend routines. Inside Sophia and Omar's home, tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted. Omar confronted her again about the photographs of her family, his anger sharper than ever. He accused her of betrayal, his voice rising with every word until it became a storm of rage that shook the walls. Sophia, exhausted from fear and silence, tried to explain, but her attempts only fueled his fury. What began as shouting escalated quickly. Omar's anger turned physical, his hands lashing out with the force of his rage. Sophia's body absorbed the violence, each strike pushing her closer to unconsciousness. She tried to shield herself, but he was relentless. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the house as he shoved her against the furniture. Neighbors later recalled hearing faint cries, though at the time they weren't sure if it was an argument or something worse. Rachel, who had grown increasingly worried after Sophia stopped answering her calls, decided to drive over. When she arrived, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The front porch bore signs of chaos, shards of broken glass scattered near the door, the curtains inside drawn tightly shut. Her heart raced as she called out Sophia's name, but no one answered. Without hesitation, Rachel dialed 911, her voice shaking as she explained the urgency. Inside, Sophia lay injured, her strength fading as minutes felt like hours. The house that once symbolized a new beginning had become a prison of violence. The sound of sirens in the distance would soon break the silence. But for Sophia, the nightmare had already left scars that could never be erased. When the police arrived, the quiet suburban street was jolted into chaos. Flashing lights painted the brick houses red and blue as officers rushed to the door. Omar answered with a stiff expression, trying to appear calm, but his clothes were disheveled, and there were traces of broken glass still clinging to his shoes. He told the officers it had been nothing more than a heated argument, his voice steady but unconvincing. The moment they stepped inside, the truth was undeniable. Sophia was found slumped near the living room floor, barely conscious. Her face bore deep bruises, her lip was split, and her arms were marked by the violence she had endured. A shattered coffee table lay beside her, pieces scattered like silent witnesses to the brutality. One officer immediately called for medical assistance, while another secured Omar in handcuffs despite his protests. Neighbors began gathering outside, whispering in shock as the scene unfolded. For many, the cries they had dismissed earlier now weighed heavily with guilt. Paramedics carried Sophia out on a stretcher, her fragile body wrapped in a blanket as oxygen was administered. Rachel stood nearby, tears streaking her face, clutching her phone tightly as she watched her friend being taken away. She answered questions from officers, explaining her long-standing concerns about Omar's behavior and Sophia's secrecy. Omar sat in the back of a police car, his expression cold and unreadable. Though he tried to insist it was all exaggerated, the evidence spoke louder than his words. The neighbors, once accustomed to the couple's polite distance, now stared in silence at the man they thought was respectable. The quiet street had become a crime scene, and the truth of Sophia's suffering could no longer be hidden behind closed doors. The facade of their perfect life was gone forever. As investigators pieced together the events leading to the assault, a painful truth emerged. Sophia's secret about her heritage, something she had hidden out of fear, became central to the case. Detectives discovered the family album that Omar had left on the dining table, its open pages showing photographs of Sophia's late father and her extended family. These images revealed what Sophia had concealed, that she was biracial, her father African American. For Omar, this discovery had ignited the violence that nearly cost Sophia her life. The revelation shocked the community. To outsiders, the couple had seemed ordinary, even enviable. Now, whispers filled the neighborhood about the motive behind the attack. The idea that a woman had been brutalized by her husband simply because of her racial background was both horrifying and heartbreaking. Friends who had once admired their marriage were stunned to learn of the prejudice that had festered inside Omar's heart. Rachel provided a statement to police, recounting her observations of Sophia's gradual isolation and the bruises she had tried to dismiss. She broke down as she admitted she had suspected abuse but hadn't acted sooner. Her guilt was overwhelming, but her testimony gave investigators a clearer picture of the danger Sophia had lived in. Daniel, too, was questioned. He explained how he had noticed Sophia's exhaustion and anxiety at work, how she seemed trapped but unwilling to confide in anyone. His account helped establish the pattern of control and fear that defined her marriage. For Sophia, lying in a hospital bed, the humiliation of her secret being exposed was mixed with relief. The burden she had carried for so long was finally in the open, though it had come at a terrible cost. The case was no longer just about violence. It was about hate, prejudice, and a marriage built on fragile lies. The trial that followed was a storm of emotions, evidence, and painful revelations. The courtroom was packed each day, filled with reporters, neighbors, and supporters who wanted to see justice for Sophia. The prosecution laid out a chilling narrative, detailing not only the assault but the deeper motive behind it. They presented the photographs from Sophia's family album, showing how the discovery of her black heritage had triggered Omar's violent rage. Prosecutors argued that this was not a simple case of domestic violence. It was an attack fueled by hate, control, and prejudice. Sophia's injuries were documented in medical reports and photographs shown to the jury. Doctors described the extent of the damage: broken ribs, deep bruises, and trauma that could have ended her life if help had come any later. Rachel was called to testify, and her voice cracked as she recounted the signs she had seen over the months: Sophia's fading smile, the unexplained bruises, the isolation. She admitted her regret for not alerting authorities sooner, her testimony a mix of sorrow and determination. Daniel also took the stand, explaining his growing concern at work, his attempts to reach Sophia, and the fear that lingered in her every word. His observations highlighted the pattern of abuse, showing the jury that Omar's control was deliberate and unrelenting. The defense tried to cast doubt, arguing that the marriage had been troubled on both sides, portraying Omar as a man under stress rather than a violent abuser. But the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses, medical experts, and Sophia's own courage painted a stark picture. The jury listened, their faces hardening as each detail unfolded. What had begun as whispers in a quiet neighborhood had now become a powerful case, with Sophia's truth finally breaking through the silence. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its breath. Omar was found guilty of aggravated assault with a hate crime enhancement, a decision that sent a powerful message. The sentence was severe, ensuring he would spend many years behind bars. For Sophia, it was a moment of justice, though the relief was mixed with lingering pain. The scars on her body would heal in time, but the emotional wounds ran deeper, reminders of the love she once believed in that turned into her greatest nightmare. Rachel stood by her side throughout the ordeal, helping Sophia transition back into daily life. She accompanied her to therapy appointments, encouraged her during sleepless nights, and reminded her that she was no longer alone. Their bond grew stronger, forged in hardship, and Rachel became more than a friend. She became Sophia's anchor. Daniel, too, continued to support her, offering kindness and stability as she slowly returned to work. His quiet encouragement gave Sophia a sense of normalcy she thought she had lost forever. The community, once blinded by outward appearances, could no longer ignore the truths hidden in silence. Neighbors who had dismissed the sounds of arguments now carried the weight of regret, realizing how easily abuse could hide behind closed doors. The case opened conversations about prejudice, domestic violence, and the importance of speaking out, sparking awareness far beyond their street. Sophia's life was changed forever, but she chose not to let her suffering define her. She began sharing her story at community events, speaking with honesty about the dangers of control, the power of secrets, and the resilience it takes to survive. Though the nightmare had left her with scars, it also gave her a voice. And with that voice, she vowed never to be silenced again.